while addressing the incidence of high non-performing loans within the financial system, which experts say has been a key deterrent to lending by financial institutions.
So the Act is also meant to strengthen the regulatory and supervisory framework for the financial industry, provide additional tools for managing failing institutions, and help systemic distress to preserve financial stability.
Now, clearly, the enactment of the BOFI Act 2020 has been seen as a historic and significant achievement, indicative of effective collaboration between the executive and the legislative arms of government in the country. Well,
of course, we know that the Senate President Ahmed Lawan has commended Mr. President's assent to this bill, to this act. Of course, stressing the Senate's resolve to continue to work tirelessly to update Nigeria's, some of Nigeria's outdated laws, and with the aim of ensuring that they are vibrant and in consonance with present reality.
Many questions are on my mind right now. And the most pertinent is, why does the BOFI Act matter to the banking sector in the country at this time? And how can it strengthen the sector, and what does it mean for the Nigerian economy? We shall put these issues and more on the table before our guests in the course of the program on Good Morning Nigeria today. We are reaching you live on the network service of the NTA. I am Yusuf Nadab Osman.
All right, don't worry about the technicality that our topic today may sound, but it is actually our duty to explain it to you. What does it mean? How does it affect the banking industry? And of course, how does it provide a platform to stabilize our economy? And we will have the guests to dissect this bill and give us the new imperatives therein. And it's on this note I join my colleague, Yusuf, to welcome you to the program, Good Morning Nigeria. It's broadcast live on the network service. I am Claire Delabu Abdul Razak. As always, we have our complimentary segments, which will be coming right immediately after the news, and I'll be talking about business, and of course Bayo Tebe will join us later for a review of the newspapers. Chimobi Walter Naji is seated already for the morning news. Chimobi, good morning. You are our correspondent on the business desk. This is an act, that has come to strengthen our economy and the financial systems, isn't it?
Yeah, Claire, that's actually true. It's an act or a bill before becoming an act that a lot of stakeholders in the financial institution have actually been clamoring for that act to come into place. And with the signing of that into law, I think it spells a lot of expectations for players in the industry.
In that industry.
Yes.
Mm.
All right, good morning, Nigeria, and welcome to the morning news. Minister of Police Affairs, Mohammed Megari Dingiadi, says more proactive, decisive, and robust plan of action shall soon be unfolded towards curtailing and containing the prevailing acts of crime and criminality in parts of the country. The extraordinary National Security Council meeting was summoned by President Muhammadu Buhari to discuss moves to ensure Nigeria is more effectively secured and peace reigns supreme for the good of all.
Mr. President thanked members for the efforts they are making in maintaining peace and will do whatever it is to support security agencies in providing peace in the country. Mr. President assures Nigerians that he will do whatever it takes to ensure that the repeat of NDSA's protests does not occur in Nigeria again.
And in the meantime, Governor Yahaya Bello of Kogi State has reaffirmed the commitment of the government and people of the Confluence State to the values and virtues of Buhari presidency as it strives towards enhancing the nation's trajectory to the next level of socio-economic development. The governor stated this while briefing journalists on the outcome of his engagement with President Muhammadu Buhari.
The President's attention to the dredging of River Niger from the High Sea to Lokoja and up to Baru. If actually we want the economy of this country and of the North to prosper. We equally appreciated, Mr. President, over the railway line that has been approved from Itakpe to Lokoja to FCT and even up to Baro.
The Nigeria Labour Congress has drawn the attention of the Senate Committee on Aviation to the shortcomings of some provisions in the 6 aviation bills currently before the National Assembly. NLC National President Ayuba Waba conveyed the position of the union during a meeting with the Senate Committee.
Section 29 of the Civil Aviation Act, we plead that it should be expunged because it's actually in conflict with the existing provision of the labor law, which is part of our international commitment. The provision of interim board in the bill of aviation agencies is not also in tandem with global best practice.
And the House of Representatives has reiterated that funding of agricultural activities should remain a priority for food security. It was during a budget defense session with the Minister of Agriculture, Muhammad Sabunanono, that the House also opened a 3-day public hearing on 6 aviation amendment bills.
This public hearing is a testament to our commitment to give new life to the aviation sector and make our efforts to be a better non-oil revenue generating sector as is witnessed in other advanced economies.
And Nigeria's Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, has cautioned Gambia's finance policymakers not to embark on Nigeria's public finance management reforms without the devotion of topmost political leadership. She was speaking at the signing of a memorandum of understanding between both countries that will see Nigeria provide 5 years technical support on the Treasury single account for the Gambia.
Trying to do is what we've done here to consolidate all of government accounts into one single Treasury account that will be managed by the Central Bank of the Gambia. The benefits, of course, are improvements in public financial management, liquidity management, and also the reduction in the cost of having to borrow when you can pool all your accounts and use the resources.
Now, proper management of the conflict for national development is the crux of the 4-day leadership course on preventive diplomacy and conflict resolution holding in Abuja. The event was organized by the National Orientation Agency and Peace Building Development Consult.
Always use alternative dispute resolution, preventive policing, rather than being reactive.
Officers and men and participants will leave here equipped with additional skills, modern day skills of handling conflict, so that all of us will now move into the community to play that role.
Now, the violence and looting that accompanied the NSAS protests across the nation is still a source of worry to some concerned citizens. The coalition of civil society groups in Nigeria has flagged off a youth reorientation campaign on the legal means of engaging government.
The civil society coalition has decided to engage the young people so that we will reorganize their understanding of what governance is. Make sure you use your vote. Stand on the day of election.
And to some COVID-19 news now, the Nigeria Center for Disease Control (NCDC) has announced 152 new cases of coronavirus, bringing the total number of confirmed cases to 65,457, I beg your pardon, in Nigeria. And of the 152 new cases, Lagos has 61, Oyo 39, the FCT has 13, Yobe 10, Bauchi 6, Kaduna 5, Kano, Kwara and Plateau have 4 new cases each, while Edo, Ogun and Rivers confirmed 2 new cases each. On total number of cases per state chart, Lagos has 22,562 cases, with the FCT following next with 6,385 cases, while Plateau has 3,724 cases. About 61,337 recovered patients have been discharged, with an unfortunate 1,163 deaths on record. All right, and that concludes the morning news highlights. Good morning, Nigeria. on Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act 2020 continues with Claire and Yusuf just after the break. Do stay with us.
A scorecard like no other. Government has put in place measures and initiatives principally targeted at youths, women, and the most vulnerable groups in our society. These included broad plan to lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in the next 10 years. The creation of 75 billion naira National Youth Investment Fund to provide opportunities for the youths, and the Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises Survivor Fund, through which government is A. Paying 3-month salaries of the staff of 100,000 micro, small and medium enterprises. B. Paying for the registration of 250,000 businesses at the Corporate Affairs Commission. C. Giving a grant of 30,000 naira to 100,000 artisans and guaranteeing market for the product of traders. These are in addition to many other initiatives such as farmer money, trader money, market money, N-Power, N-Tech, and N-Agro. These and more in spite of a recession and a global pandemic.
Do you know that social media is not good or bad, and that it is you who is using it that is either good or bad? Bad social media users spread rumors and fake news without verification. But good social media users stop, verify the information, and reflect before sharing it. Now, are you a good social media user? Stop the spread of fake news. Verify the authenticity of your source for a better Nigeria.
This message is from the National Orientation Agency. The Council of Our Fathers.
My advice to these young people is please do not take us back to those harrowing days. You probably do not know what it is.
Nigerian youths, let's build our nation together.
Identity theft is when the person obtains information illegally about someone else. Commands try to find such information such as full name, maiden name, address, date of birth, national identity number, password, phone number, email, and credit card number to use them for other malicious purposes. Some safety and prevention tips are: do not respond to unsolicited requests for personal information such as your name, date of birth, national identity number, or bank account number by phone, mail, or online. Review your debit card bank account statements. Promptly compare receipts with account statements and watch for unauthorized transactions. Spread receipts, credit offers, account statements, and expired debit cards to prevent dumpster divers from getting your personal information.
This message is sponsored by the Nigerian Communications Commission. For further inquiry, contact nmis@ncc.gov.ng.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria on Nigerian Television Authority. It's now time for some business news, and Ronami Agirani is our guide.
Discussing privatization at a webinar organized by the Nigerian Stock Exchange, the Nigerian Governors Forum, and the Nigerian Investment Promotion Council. Mr. Lamido Yuguda, Director General of the Securities Exchange Commission, touted privatization as an avenue for the government to unlock the abundant economic potential of government-owned enterprises. He further explained that proceeds from the sale of these assets will not only augment budget shortfalls, but could also be used to fund critical infrastructure. Now let's take a look at how the stock market performed on Tuesday, the 17th of November, 2020. With business news, I'm Ronami Egirani.
All right, thank you, Ronami Egirani, for the business package. Let's go straight now to business, newspaper review, coming up in just a moment.
And as usual, our newspaper reviewer Bio Atuebi is in the house. Good morning, Bio.
Thank you, Yusuf. Good morning.
Welcome.
Good morning, Claire.
Hi, Bio.
Good morning, Nigeria.
Yeah, my favorite colors.
And you've matched today, too.
What a coincidence.
It looks like.
I told you yesterday.
You did.
There was no cause for alarm. We played a draw in Siaka Stevens Stadium when here Nachos goal was disallowed. And guess what? Nigeria is still topping the league in Group L.
That's not my concern so much, really. It's not the topping that matters. The issue is we should have won that match because we are Nigeria.
It was two teams playing, Nigeria playing Celerio.
You know,
either could have won. Do you know what? Sudan beat Ghana 1-0 yesterday. There are no minions in football any longer.
There are none, really. There are none.
So I want to take advantage of the fact that our newspaper stand is quite slim this morning to talk on this issue of sports.
Yes.
I think if you look at our playing pattern over the years, you know, reality is evolving. Things are evolving. So football must evolve. We can no longer be playing the tap, 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 you know, style we used to, we are known for in those days. Our players are still playing pass one and then you wait, you go back, and then you just want to, you know, lazy type of football play, if you ask me.
Well, if we are to go to the past, if we are going to the past, in the past we had a kind of football academy. There were several of them, and when Otto Gloria came, they were able to develop a pattern that you can identify as a Nigeria pattern. That is no longer there. What we now have is that we are lucky, we have brilliant young men who are playing in clubs in Europe, and when the time comes, all we need to do, or all we are doing, is to pick them here and there, and match them together, and hope that we will have a team. Unfortunately, even those who are playing in our Nigerian league team have all of a sudden been excluded from it. Nobody builds a team like that without involving after all those who are playing abroad started their career from the home.
Can you see why there's no blame, therefore, among the players?
No pattern.
And you can also see why even the technical advisor, God or whatever his name is, says he singled out one player in that match yesterday for praise, and that was the goalkeeper. He said he made tremendous saves.
Of course.
And of course, which means the players inside didn't meet his expectation.
But technically, how do you rate the performance, the two sides, technically?
Well, you see, there is something at stake. And they were playing at an edgy time and in an atmosphere where there are no spectators. It eventually was like a practice match. But be that as it may, I think there is a high hope in the kind of team we have now. They are very youthful and they have promising. If we are lucky to have them play together for a long time, we will be able to build a blend and we will have them not individual players, but we will have a team.
Is your position kind of exonerating the coach, Roa?
No. I don't exonerate the coach. I cannot exonerate the technical team that advises the coach. Because until and unless you are able to blend what you have at home and what you have abroad, you cannot say you have a national team. Anyway,
let me just exonerate the coach and the team itself, given the fact that two things played out. The pitch wasn't so good as such. That was plain, we can see it. Our boys are used to playing on very nice standard pitch and world-class pitches. And of course, we couldn't just get the blend, and that's just one of the bends that, brought us down. But all the same, we are on the top of the table. So that's the most important thing.
Win some, lose some. But luckily, we drew, and we are still on top of that Group L.
Right, let's look at Daily Trust and see what's up there on the newspaper today. Daily Trust has under the must here, strike. No fund for ASUS UTES, that is the ASUS hardware federal government says, and we get that story on page 14. On page 38, Governor Umahi says Warada gave reasons why he dumped PDP for APC. The bottom of the page says police silent over abduction of 12 ASPs. And you have the story there. No helicopter shot down in Borno, NAF says, and this is going to be on page 6. On page 37, strange disease killed 50 in Kogi, according to a lawmaker. And my 11-year-old daughter was gang raped to death. That's going to be on page 32. The big story here on Daily Trust is about the, Abuja-Kaduna highway and the kidnap that took place there a couple of days ago. Kidnappers demand 270 million naira ransom for 9 ABU students. And the riders are, I never knew I would survive, said the driver. Second rider is multiple attacks claims 16 lives in 4 Kaduna local government areas, and bandits have been degraded. Police affairs says this. You get the details of this on pages 5 and 10. Clear?
Bayo, you need to...
The story of the students, ABU students, there were 12 of them. They were going to French village in Lagos as part of their activities. I think it's their language program training. But they came and met these bandits who mounted the roadblock on the highway. The driver was able to maneuver, and the driver escaped with 2 of the students. In fact, 1 of the students had a gunshot wound. But for now, 9 of them are with the bandits. And the bandits have already got in touch with the families. They are demanding 30 million for each student. So for the 9 students, they want 270 million.
I think they came down because they started with 400
They started with
million.
400.
Yes.
And now they have come down to 270, 30 million for each child.
Yeah.
Now, the gruesome thing is that they had blocked the highway both on both sides of the lane. It was just, the driver said he cannot imagine how he's still alive, before he was able to maneuver with the bus and then he managed to escape with 3 of the students. The other concern, worrying thing is that 12 assistant superintendents of police, they were moving to Zamfara on assignment from Borno State. They also have been abducted by bandits. And how did it come? A wife of one of them said he couldn't get in touch with the husband over 3 days. And when she went to the barrack to find out, they got the bad news that apparently they have been abducted. And one of the wives said that the husband got across, said, we are in trouble. Please go and sell my house and bring 1 million. If you don't do so, you may not hear from me again. That is the extent to which it is. So now banditry is getting completely almost out of hand. Not too long ago, just only about 2 months ago, I think, Governor Nasir El-Rufai was on the air to say that the Kaduna-Abuja highway was very, very safe because they had put measures there and everything was safe. Because those who traveled there said that after a few kilometers, you could see patrol vehicles of security men there, and it made the road safe. But since the advent of NSAS and the fact that the police themselves have been browbeaten, there has been a decline in policing and the level of security, and this is very alarming. The former Inspector General of Police,
Idris Bako?
No, not Idris Bako, Tafa Balogun.
Tafa, okay.
He has already appealed that please, yes, you were humiliated, but please, my brothers and sisters in the police, please go back to your duty post. We need to have them back to their duty post. They are our police. They are all we have. They are there to police you and I. And unless we give them the cooperation and stop browbeating them, they will not be able to protect you and I. That is the danger that we are now facing.
The police is reassuring Nigerians, really. I heard Frank Bad this morning talking about how ready they are to come that very place and make it safe, really. They seem to be giving us the promises and the assurances we really want to hear, but Nigerians really want to see action. And that's, I think that can be connected to the president's concern about this insecurity in the country, which brought about the meeting they had yesterday with the security chiefs across the country.
Yes, there was an emergency national security meeting, and that was when the president gave indication that what happened with the NSAS protests and the violence shall never happen again. And the measures the president has indicated is that there's going to be a comprehensive involvement of everybody involved. The youths, traditional rulers, all leaders, including religious leaders, all will be involved in issues of dialogue and discussing what the problem, invariably helping the community and involving the community in the process of security and securing the nation.
There's a big story on the editorial, I think.
Yes, indeed. I'm just tongue-tied by I really don't know what to say. I just pray that things normalize because it's frightening now, you know, to travel by road. Very, very frightening. The editorial is taken from the Punch, and it's on the bogus pensions for ex-governors, scrapping it. So I just read a part, and the high points of this editorial says the Federal High Court in Lagos State, in a landmark judgment in December 2019, are you taking note?
Yes.
Ordered the federal government to recover pensions collected by former governors now serving as ministers and members of the National Assembly. However, till date, there is no indication that the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Abubakar Malami, has enforced this order. That's this paper, and then it goes on to say, it is not too late to do the right thing. State government must immediately repeal the frivolous expenses and laws that institutionalize waste and plunder. I think, and this is pegged, you know, at a time when the economy is, of course, suffering from the effect of COVID-19 pandemic. And so I think that's the crux of this editorial.
Yes, before I go to that, there's this human interest story which I think I need to draw attention to. 50 persons are said to have been killed by what has been described as an epidemic in the Olamaboro local government area in Kogi State.
That's leprosy. It was on the papers yesterday.
They are saying it's leprosy, but the symptoms they are manifesting is including headache, red eye, loss of appetite, and inability to defecate, and sometimes convulsion. How can that be related to leprosy? So a member of the House of Assembly from that area raised that issue there. And you also will recall that of recent, in Delta, and I think Benue and other states, there have been these incessant deaths too, which has been tied to yellow fever. The Center for Disease Control needs to send an emergency team. And also they've called on the Commissioner of Health in Kogi State to send a team to at least ascertain what is causing those deaths. But meanwhile, coming back to the editorial, the issue of the bogus of pension was raised just about 2 weeks ago by the governor of Lagos State, when he said that Lagos State can no longer afford, therefore he's going to send a bill to the Lagos State House of Assembly to repeal the law that was established in 2007. Already Zamfara, I think, and which other state is that, and Imo have already done away with the law.
The whole thing.
Yeah, Zamfara and Imo has already done away with the law. But other states, the 7 other states are still holding on to it. In fact, the governor of Delta State was on record to have said that they are not guided by what is happening on from Lagos, because that pension is established by a law of the state. But because of the cost of governance, and most people now feel that that pension is so bogus that it should be repealed. But calling the attention of the Attorney General of the Federation, there was a Federal High Court ruling that said that former governors who are now serving either as senators or ministers, who probably are earning those pension and also taking salary, something has to be done about it. But many of them are on record to have said that they have never taken that pension that were supposed to have been passed by law.
No, these are good initiatives from the states, and the concern is mostly hinged on the fact that Nigeria needs money. People are really looking for a lot of jobs and so many other developmental issues. And the monies that have been spent on pensions and these allowances and the rest of them could go a long way in trying to solve some of these problems, most especially, like the editorial said, in the COVID days. Monies are not there, and people, business is not thriving so much, and you know, there are lots of things
hard to come by. So the little we have must be used judiciously, not kind of frittered away. After all, how long did they serve? Any governor who is earning that, or deputy governor, will probably have served for only 8 years. Public servant who served for 35 years, how much do they earn?
Well, many thanks, Bayo, for coming on Good Morning Nigeria this morning. Tomorrow is going to be another day.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria, and we'll now take a break. We'll be back in a moment with more on it.
the counsel of our fathers.
I will urge and advise our younger generation to use talent and brain to sort out problems, not arms.
Nigerian youths, let's build our nation together.
Guess what?
What?
I scored a hat trick today.
Cool!
Wow!
And how did you celebrate?
Just do your hands like this.
And hold your nose like this.
Body odor is caused by germs. That's why you need the new improved Dettol Cool Soap, which protects against 99.9% odor-causing germs with an extra burst of menthol freshness. Dettol, be 100% sure.
These days, people get their news and information from more media sources than ever before. Some of the news and information given are fake, unverified, doctored, and manufactured to create confusion, stir disaffection, and cause disunity. Before you believe or share any news, ask yourself, is this real? Is it from a credible source? Is it verified or verifiable? Fake news is dangerous. Whether you do it for fun or for political gains, real people can get hurt. Fake news, don't create it, don't spread it.
This is a public service announcement from NTA.
Okay, let me just take us a little back in the late 90s and probably the dawn of the millennium. That's in the early part of the year 2000, when some 45 banks were listed as failed banks. And of course, those banks had their licenses revoked by the CBN. We all know the period when we had so many banks, you know, especially in Lagos and other parts of the country. And of course, the court also issued order that those banks, you know, be closed, declared closed, and the NDIC then appointed as a liquidator, you know, to them. And the issue of failed banks, as we later, you know, discovered, has been pegged on a particular bill, which fortunately has been amended, and the president has, of course, signed it into law. That's the Bank and Other Financial Institutions Act 2020. It has been described as a monumental piece of legislation precisely because of what it will do, and that is to enhance the soundness and resilience of the financial system, so that we do not encounter, you know, similar, episodes of the 1990s. And of course, it will also help to sustain the economy and provide a stability base for it. So this morning on Good Morning Nigeria, that will be our focus. But just before we bring in our guests, let's listen to this backgrounder put together by Kunle Adeye.
Nigeria's banking and financial sector had undergone many reforms, which are mostly aimed at strengthening it. Major stakeholders have constantly yearned for a review of the laws guiding the financial sector following the 2004 and 2008 financial crises, which revealed deterioration in banks' assets based on excessive risk-taking, as well as reckless credit facilities and other unethical practices. The operations of banks and other financial institutions have been guided by the Act, which was last amended in 1991. With recent developments in global banking practices, it therefore became imperative for it to operate under a professionally and globally acceptable banking system. Consequently, President Muhammadu Buhari on November 13, 2020, assented to the Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act 2020. This replaces the Act which was last updated in 1991. New components of the Act include limitations to which banks and other financial institutions in Nigeria can engage in businesses. It also empowers the Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria to impose and review penalties on infractions in the banking sector to the tune of 100 million naira. The 2020 Act also gives room for creation of a special tribunal to enforce and recover eligible loans, including resolutions of loan-related matters. With these benefits and other embedded in the new act, can it be said with every finality that Nigeria's banking sector is on the path to stability, or does it still need some injections to make it a global brand? Answers to these and many more on Good Morning Nigeria in a moment.
All right, thank you, Kunle, for that background report you have put together for us. So let's quickly introduce our guests that will give us greater understanding of what this act is all about. Seated with us right here in the studio, we have Professor Uche Uwaleke, and he is President, Capital Market Academics of Nigeria, and of course a professor in Nasarawa State University. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Nigeria.
And we also have from our Kaduna studio, we have Professor Yushao Ango. He's Professor of Finance and Entrepreneurship, Kaduna State University. Prof, thank you very much for joining us on Good Morning Nigeria today.
My pleasure. Good morning.
And joining us from Lagos Network Center is Ayodeji Ebo, Senior Economist and Head, Research and Strategy, Greenwich Merchant Bank. Many thanks for joining us.
Morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Now, let's get started with this discussion and let's see what justice we can make to it, to the topic that is in the next 1.5 hours. Prof, let's get started with you and then get a clear picture of the Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act 2020. What's there in it? Let the people know. What promise does it hold for them? What is in this act?
It holds a lot of promise, to use your word, for the financial sector and the economy as a whole. It holds a lot of strong promise. Because just as you know, if there is any sector of the economy that requires regulation, that requires to be well regulated, it is the banking sector. Because if something happens to the banking sector, it has a way of permeating through other sectors, and then we'll have a crisis on our hands. The 2008 financial crisis, for example, started from the banking sector. And of course, we know it had ripple effects all across the world, including Nigeria. It's one sector that if something touches it, it's not just the money market that will be affected. It also affects even the capital market. Because as you know, many of our banks today, especially the systemically important ones, are quoted on the stock exchange. So if something happens to the money market, it also affects the capital market. And banks play a major role even in capital market operations and capital market transactions generally. So for me, the BOFIA 2020 was long in coming. It's a welcome development. Of course, it's one act that has now repealed the old one, the BOFIA 1991. And that's because BOFIA 1991 has become more or less obsolete. Has obsolete laws, obsolete provisions. So what BOFIA 2020 has done, one of the things it has done, is to recognize the developments in the financial, sector, financial space, developments in terms of, brought about by technology. So now the BOFIA 2020 has made provisions for the regulation of fintech companies that are engaged in money market activities in particular. It has also captured microfinance, banks. And more importantly too, it has also put in place stiffer sanctions for infractions. Unlike before, when banks, would be too willing to pay fines, to flout a regulation because the fines, were very small. So now the fines, the penalties are now stiffer. And there's even a shift now more to the individuals, than to the institution. So when there's an infraction, directors of the banks are now held a lot more accountable. So it forces them to sit up. So it is going to improve the entire financial system, stability. And I also know that some of the provisions there will go a long way in solving a seemingly intractable problem in the banking sector, which is the issue of poor asset quality of banks linked to high non-performing loans. Okay? If you compare us with other jurisdictions, the rate of non-performing loans in Nigeria, okay, is quite high. And that was why at a point in time the central bank said if a bank's non-performing loan is above 10%, such a bank would not be allowed to pay dividends. One of the provisions in that bill that will ensure that non-performing loans get reduced is I think section 19. Section 19 of the BOFIA 2020 prohibits banks from granting unsecured credit. Okay, an important C in banking. Now, I'm back to theory now. We'll talk about the 5 C's. Okay, there are even more now of credit. One important one there is collateral. Okay, if you're giving a loan, there must be collateral. So the BOFIA now is prohibiting banks from giving loans that are not well collateralized. So that will also help to reduce the issue of non-performing loans. The other one is also the one that some say is contentious. The issue of setting up now a loan recovery tribunal. So the BOFIA 2020 has now put in place a loan recovery tribunal, a credit tribunal, just as we have in the capital market. The capital market will have the investment and securities tribunal. So what that does is to help speedy resolution of disputes in the banking sector. Okay, it was not there originally. Let me also say that I had the privilege of making a presentation during the public hearing, during the National Assembly public hearing. I went there. I made a presentation in my capacity as a member of the academia. So I was given the opportunity to talk, to speak. Okay, so and I spoke. And one of the things I said during the public hearing, which was not originally in the bill that was sent, is this issue of credit tribunal. Okay. Yes, I mentioned it. I said the bill you have doesn't have a credit tribunal, and that it would be nice if something like that is included. And I'm happy to know that that was accepted, and that credit tribunal has now been included, because I cited cases of some countries that have credit tribunal. In India, for example, India has a debt recovery tribunal and also a debt recovery appellate tribunal. So that quickens the various disputes you have in the banking sector and aids the recovery of loans. So people say it's a duplication of, that we have the courts are there, we have EFCC and so on, we have the police, then why have a credit tribunal? Okay, the justification for a credit tribunal is the high rate of non-performing loans we have in Nigeria.
But since you are the one that brought up that issue,
I was one of the people that met. Yes,
yeah.
met
Let me congratulate you for that and having made it part of the bill, part of the act anyway. Now,
sorry, let me bring in Professor Yushao Angu, Professor of Finance and Entrepreneurship, Kaduna State University. Prof, the Prof here, Professor Uche Walike, has given us some of the merits, in this new act. But I would like for you to, in evaluating the now obsolete, law, that's the BOFI Act 2004, and how it aided or affected banks and financial system. I would also like you to background this for us, and what exactly is the prompt, for the amendment.
Really, if we are looking at the background, we have to look at the banking system from the beginning. If you recall, when banking started, up to 1958, there was no regulation at all. We had an era of zero regulation, and regulation started after 1958, And by 1959 or so, when the Central Bank Act was enacted, that was the era of strict regulation, in the banking system. Subsequently, by 1986, when the structural adjustment program came in, so many reforms came in. And those reforms basically were aimed at making as transparent as possible a lot of operations and relaxing a lot of things. For example, before then, banks were made to open branches in rural areas as a government policy. Banks were instructed, by government to lend a certain percentage of their credits, to certain sectors of the economy, highly regulated. After structural adjustment program and the subsequent reforms that came in, including the 1991 BOPIA, a lot of things were relaxed, including the process of licensing of banks and revocation of banks. Now, what has happened, or what is happening with this law, the 2020 law, is that government and the National Assembly itself has seen that there are quite a lot of developments, and there is need to come up with laws to take care of them. Now, a lot of challenges, like Prof said, in the banking sector, a lot of problems that we have had all along were due to non-performing loans, because that is what led to collapse of many banks in history, in this country and everywhere else. So the effort made in this bill to put measures that will reduce some of these incidences is something to look at and say is commendable, and including also the tribunal. Prof, congrats for initiating. What you have done is to show that academics actually can propose solutions to national economies, not only theory. We can also propose solutions to real problems of this country, and I believe quite a number of problems can be resolved that way. Now, much of the Act also, the 2020 Act, brought out a lot of corporate governance issues. Now, a major problem, again, pertaining to non-performing loans, had to do with insider abuse, where some directors of banks, we know that in Nigeria, we had the failed bank tribunal incident during the military regime. We know that a lot of bank directors used to take advantage of depositors' funds and lend to themselves directly or indirectly. This has been strengthened, with BOPIA 2020, whereby a lot of that is limited. That is a major contributor. Another thing that I saw in that law is limiting the what we refer to in bank lending as one obligo limit. One obligo limit is the amount of money you can lend to a person. When we say a person, we are also referring to corporate entities or a group, who are jointly owned by the same persons, limiting it to 20% for commercial banks and 50% of paid-up capital unimpaired by losses. All of those were trying to encourage good governance, corporate governance, that is, in the banking sector. So those are some of the changes that have been brought, among other things. Thank you.
Oh, many thanks, Professor Yushau Ango. There is no doubt that, technology played a very important role in trying to get this bill out, or this act out. And it seems as if the banking sector has been very much concerned about this, and it seems it's going to go a long way in putting across or getting its operations much more improved this time around. Now, Ayodeji Ebo, Senior Economist and Head Research and Strategy, Greenwich Merchant Bank, if I may ask you this, what or how strong has the ICT or the technology, factor been in making this act a reality?
Thank you. If I laid some form of background, if we look at the technology space in Nigeria, with the advent of mobile or telecommunication, if you look, we have over 80 million users of telephones. If you look at the penetration rate, so it's almost close to about 80 to 85%. So the banks have been able to leverage on that technology. If you recall, those days, online banking was not possible because you need a device for you to be able to action or for you to be able to use those online devices. So the advent or the background of technology has really helped banks to be able to build their system on this, and that has enhanced and has increased transactions within the banking space. You also want to look at the ease of also banking. If you discuss with a lot of the bank customers, most of them, it's been long for most people as have visited the bank. You do all your transfer, you do all your transactions online. Even as significant as statement, you can request for your statement online. So riding on technology, and especially mobile phone, which you look at this new act is also trying to cover the aspect of fintechs, which is also very critical to support financial penetration. So by and large, if you look at the riding on the back of technology, financial inclusion has also improved. Most banks now have what you call USSD code that doesn't ride on internet. So you can transfer money without internet, and you can also receive the code to go and take money from the agency banking. So they've been able to, the banking system has been able to ride on that robust technology. And over time, even if you look at the security of the Nigerian banking system, that I'm talking about the internet security, you would see that they are stronger than what you even have in some of the developed countries. The authentication, the two-factor authentication that has been introduced, there are some advanced countries that don't even have that on their platform. So that buttresses the fact that our technology system is also very strong. I'm not saying it's perfect, but we have been able to, at least we've started and we've continued to increase on that based on some of the loopholes that we continue to see. That will continue to increase the security system or features that will be introduced in it. So it's critical that technology has to be taken very serious because of the ease of usage and because of how you can also be able to penetrate into the rural area, which is also very critical.
All right, thank you, your DG Ebo. Let's come back now to the studio. Professor Uche Uwalike, this act is meant to address a lot of infractions, in the financial institutions, especially the money deposit banks and other commercial banks. You've talked about the issue of NPLS. You talked about the issue of insider, that's and abuse of corporate governance laws and all that. So, does it? I'd just like you to talk to us about the health status of our banks. What does this imply? How does it? What does this tell us about the health status of our banks?
Well, if we go by what the central bank, tells us, I think the financial system is stable. Our banks are, I would say, stable, largely stable.
Regardless of the whole...
Yes, largely stable in the sense that if you look at the indicators, some performance indicators, including even the non-performing loans, okay, what you find that over time, okay, especially in recent times, it is trending downwards. As I said, there was a time it used to be as high as 14–15%. Okay, so today it is at least below 10%, the non-performing loans. So
as of this year, what I have is 10%.
10%?
Yes, 10%, between 9 and 10%.
Okay, but I know it's below 10%. If you can get that even from the last MPC communique, where the central bank talked about financial sector indicators. So for the banking sector in general, I would say that is quite, it has improved. And that's why also why we are seeing the numbers, even in the evaluation, in their stock market performance. Okay, the banking stocks appear to be performing well, especially the big five. They are performing well, and that goes to show that these banks have, if you like, call it strong fundamentals. They have strong fundamentals. So our banks are relatively strong, especially since
when you talk of strong fundamentals, are you talking about their capital, the liquid capital base? I don't know.
Okay, for capital adequacy ratio, again boils down to the indicators I talked about. The financial sector indicator, for banks. Okay, the capital adequacy ratio, the issue of non-performing loans. Okay, those are issues around prudential issues, and even the BOFIA. The BOFIA also made reference to minimum capital. But when you talk about fundamentals, you are referring to things like the profit, okay, the dividends. Many of them declare the interim dividend. So if you have a company, for example, what does a share? If you're a shareholder, what are your expectations from the company? You want the company to pay you dividend. So if a bank has good dividend per share or dividend yield, okay, or price earnings ratio. So these are things you will call fundamentals, for a company. So, and I think our banking system, okay, has these fundamentals. I also think the BOFIA, okay, the BOFIA 2020 has some provisions that are meant to promote corporate governance. Okay, well, you can talk about some weaknesses in corporate governance, but this BOFIA is now out to strengthen corporate governance in banks. One of such provisions is the provision that requires the central bank now to attend board meetings of the banks.
You know why I asked that question?
Yes.
Because in the course of research, NBS, I just found out that the NBS is estimating 1.4 trillion naira in terms of NPLS, that's non-performing loans, and which it says it accounts for 9% of all loans in the economy, against CBN prescribed 5% threshold.
Yes, the threshold is 5%. Yeah. The non-performing loan ratio, yes, is above the threshold, and which is why the central bank is worried about it in the first place. Central bank wants to further bring it down. What I'm saying is that, relatively speaking, relative to where we were before, okay, it would appear that non-performing loans, are coming down. And some of the measures we now have in the BOFIA will further bring it down, possibly to the 5% threshold, by the central bank. I was saying the BOFIA 2020, provides, I think, section 39 of it says that the central bank can now attend board meetings of banks. So whenever they're having their board meeting, the central bank should be invited to be in attendance as an observer. And I also think this is in line with international practice, because I know from my little research that in Hong Kong, for example, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority also holds meetings with the board of directors of banks, every year. So what that does is it creates a platform for the bank to communicate firsthand to the banks, its supervisory concerns. So if the central bank has some concerns regarding the whether it's the financial position of a bank, or its risk management process, or its internal control system, which we expect the auditors to even report on. So if there are concerns on the part of the central bank, those concerns can be made known to the banks during such meetings. Although our own talks about attending as an observer, but I would have preferred a situation where it would be a case of the type we have in Hong Kong, where the central bank meets them, the board of directors, every year. Because if you attend as an observer, there's a limit to the kinds of contributions, input that you can make. So by and large, as I said, the BOFIA has good provisions to strengthen corporate governance, to even also prevent money laundering and the likes. For example, there is a provision there that restricts our banks here, okay, from entering into relationship with certain entities abroad. Mm-hmm. There are certain entities you're not expected to enter into relations with, okay, especially if those entities are not incorporated in those countries or don't have affiliations to companies incorporated in those countries. So that's, of course, promotes regulation, because if you're a company in another country or a bank in another country and you're not incorporated in that country, okay, you can do anything and easily get away with it as long as you're not being regulated. So the BOFIA now says you don't have to enter into any relationship with any foreign entity that is not incorporated. It's just like saying don't enter into relationship with any company that doesn't have a face in that other country. So to me, that's also a very good provision.
Is that what you call shell banking?
No, that...
okay, because I also learned that this act, it's also to deal with that. So I would maybe...
Before we get down to that, it so seems as if the BOFIA 2020 will to a great extent limit money laundering,
yes,
and of course improve good governance.
It will improve good governance, yes.
And of course there's going to be stricter measures for those who take NPLs and misuse it per se.
Beautiful, yes.
We'll get back to that later. Let me get to Professor Angu, and then see, looking at the BOFI Act, it is expected to increase the appetite of banks, Prof. That's to channel credit to the real sector to support economic recovery and then also promote growth. Do you see that really happening in the nearest future, given the strength of the BOFI Act?
Well, in terms of sectoral allocation of credit, what we have seen of recent is that banks are moving more or less to safer areas, what they assume is safe. And so by that, they are hardly investing in areas that will stimulate growth, except where, for example, some interventions are done and they are just on lending, like central bank intervention or Bank of Industry or Bank of Agri is intervening somehow. The major sectors of the economy where we need huge credit to support it does not get those credits. What happens in reality is that banks are moving at two extremes. One, they go to the highest, which is the highest sectors, for example, the oil sector, the communication sector, and lend hugely there. And then they also lend to the, what we call the consumer market, which is the lower end, salaried employees, because they are sure the money will come. Not lending in between, that is in the middle, manufacturing sector and agri sector, mining sector, those sectors that need to be lent to, Now, the law will not go to the extent and has not gone to the extent of directing banks to lend. They must lend to certain sectors, because if that law, if it does that, it will go back to what we referred to earlier as the era of strict regulation. But I think, given the realities of the times, the banks have to find a way of investing in the real sector. And also not only the top end of the sector, the lower end of the sector. And like Prof said, he mentioned the fact that one of the C's was collateral. Another C is, of course, apart from capacity, there's also the C of character, I know. And there are many measures now that have been taking place that are there in terms of rating agencies and all that can actually rate some potential borrowers. So what I'm trying to say basically is that while the central bank through various means is trying to encourage them to lend to the real sector, the central bank may not necessarily direct them that they must lend to these sectors. But a lot of measures are brought in terms of interventions, and sometimes they just act as on-lenders to the real sector. I think given the teeming population we have, and especially youth population, there is need for the banks to consider safe areas of lending to the real sector of the economy, not just moving in one way. I think last year or the year before, we have had cases where banks had, some 2 years, 3 years ago, when a lot of importers of petroleum were there, and there was subsidy. Many of them just moved and lent to that sector hugely, in trillions of naira. Now, resulting in when that was stopped, and some of them could not pay them on time, that led to a huge volume of somehow non-performing loans. So basically, they don't need to move, with just one side of the whatever side they think, will do well. They need to spread their risks. That is also necessary for the bank. So I will urge them to actually lend to the real sectors, in line with the strategic objective of the country, which is to ensure that economic growth.
Okay, thank you. Ayodeji Ebo is in the Lagos Network Center, and my question is to you. I just read something out from the NBS. That's its 2019 June report, indicating, of course, the percentage of non-performing loans, that are out there. I'm sure you must have looked at the details of this act. What are the specific provisions that are directed to addressing this infraction?
Thank you. I think looking at the non-performing loan, if I'll also speak to that, CBN has also been very proactive, because if you look at this era, the era of, or this year of COVID-19, banks' non-performing loan should have risen as high as 30–40%. But CBN announced, as part of the palliative from the monetary angle, to grant forbearances. And at the last one of the MPC meetings, we saw that over 50% of the current loans have applied for forbearances. What that means is that they would have, CBN allows those banks to restructure most of these loans. So we're all aware it's a systemic problem, that we know that COVID-19 has affected a lot of businesses. A lot of schools could not open. A lot of companies had to shut down. So as a result of that, CBN gave them that leeway to restructure those loans. And that would be one of the areas or options that may be on the table, is to increase the tenor of some of these loans, also to reduce the rate at which they also service it. Some of them may even give some form of moratorium, giving them a break, and giving them that opportunity that when business pick up after a certain period, then you can resume the servicing and the pay down of the loan. It's true, the non-performing loan is, when you look at it, an average of about 10%, but there are also some outliers. If you look at the top banks, you would see that for most of the top banks have less than 5% NPL. And what most of the banks are strengthening their risk management system. But what we're also noticing, what we've noticed within the system is, for most of the banks, they all focus on existing sector, all focus on existing loans. So you see what you say as price cutting. So you refinance existing good loans at a lower rate. So most banks are not willing to take that risk, while I also understand, because they also need to preserve shareholders' funds. Most banks will also need to develop capacity. They need to be known for a certain sector. So you develop that capacity, have a niche for yourself, develop that capacity in those areas. Do you want to focus more on the SMEs? Over time, yes, at the beginning you may lose money, but over time you would understand the cash flow of that sector. You understand all the inherent risks within that space, because it's very obvious that some of these risks will not go away. And that is why when you continue to see that premium that banks will charge when they are lending to some of those very perceived risky sector, maximum lending rates is still around 29% compared to the prime lending rate. Prime lending rate is the rate that you lend to the blue chips company. That has gone down, has moderated to around 9% from about 11% about 3 or 4 months ago due to the lower fixed income rate environment. So focusing on the non-performing loan, I believe that with what has kept it this low is the forbearances that CBN has also given for most of the banks to restructure. But the implication of that would also be on interest income. So if you have restructured a loan and you have given some form of moratorium, or the interest that should be paid, you have reduced the amount of interest that should be paid at this particular time now, or you've also increased the tenor of the loan, it means that the interest income that you would get from that loan in the interim would be lower. But interestingly, when you look at we're expecting the third quarter result of most of the banks within the next 1 week. And what some of the major areas that would see that would have covered up for some of this revenue gap would be that gains from investment securities. So when you look at the yield environment, bonds they were as high as 11-12% this year, and currently for the longer end of the curve, it's trading around the 7% level. So when you look at the spread that you get, the capital gain, so for most of the banks, you would see them making significant income from that area. Another area where is also benefiting for some of the banks, for banks that are long in terms of dollar assets, the adjustment of the naira has also favored them within that area. So by and large, I believe that the non-performing loan would be kept within the necessary levels. That particular act, which part of what Professor Waleke suggested, that the credit tribunal, I think it's really I totally agree with that, so that it's very specific. You won't have to model up with other cases, and it would also increase the time, or reduce the time that judgment will be given. So you won't have to most of these judgment elongated, because some of the things that are discouraging the banks, even if you have the collateral, someone has given you his or her house as collateral, by the time, because they know the system of how our court can elongate things, can push things forward, you may be you may not be able to realize that asset to cover that non-performing loan because of the time it's taking. And as a result, you will need to make full provision, 100% provision for that particular loan. But now, if it's what would be expecting is to see details of how long any case should go before it's finalized. You know, when you look at the election, how our electoral system is, you know that there's a certain number of days that election petitions or cases should be concluded. That is what we'll be looking forward to. Part of what would also, that I think that should also be looked at, even if it can't be included in both here now, is having a credit system. So when you look at the developed economies, you have people try to work towards earning a good credit rating system such that it attracts a certain interest rate. So if, for instance, my credit rating based on a scale of 1 to 10 is around 8, it may entitle me to an interest rate of about 15%. And if someone's credit rating is around 5, maybe the interest rate is around 22%. So you would see instances where even for those that may not require the loan now, they try to borrow and try to pay back to increase their credit rating. And as a result, you would see over time, people will want to repay back those loans to have a good credit rating, and it would also minimize the concern of the banks because they need to protect shareholders' funds, and they don't want to lose out these funds. So if you see a lot of people achieving that high credit rating, and over time, when people work towards that, if you know you default and that bans you almost for life from accessing loan, or you need to pay a significant premium for you to even be able to borrow.
Ayodeji, thank you very much for those insights. Let me just come back to the studio here and then get the insight of Professor Uche Owaleke on this, the tribunal issue. Banks, when we talk about the tribunal, what comes to mind is default and some infractions, either on the part of the bank or the consumer or the customer. Credits are there, loans are there, so the interaction continues between the banks and the customers and the consumers of banking services and the rest of them. What is BOFI saying about, or how strong is the tribunal aspect of BOFI in trying to check this so much so that it can make the bank stronger and give more confidence to the customer?
Yeah, thank you. Just as I said earlier on, we have lessons to learn from other climes. In India, I keep using India as an example.
Why do you always want to refer to
because
India?
Studies in India have shown that the establishment of the debt recovery by banks and other financial institutions Act of 1993 in India, studies have shown that has helped in reducing this issue of non-performing loans.
Okay.
Yes, in India. And that's why, apart from having the debt recovery tribunal, I also said there is also the debt recovery appellate tribunal,
okay,
like
the
appellate court.
Now.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, in India. So back home, I think strongly that the credit tribunal will serve the same purpose, because what it does will be to, as I said, hasten the adjudication process. Okay, if there is dispute, you take it to the tribunal. Quick dispensation of justice. We know the issue that we have with our courts, which is part of why we have this AMCOM. If we had this credit tribunal before now, maybe the issue of huge non-performing loans, or toxic assets wouldn't have been there, and maybe we wouldn't have been talking about AMCOM. Today, AMCOM has over 5 trillion naira outstanding debts to recover. And that is why anytime we talk about Nigeria's debt, I always include the AMCOM 5 trillion, because that contingent liability, in my view, is likely to crystallize. And once it crystallizes, it becomes the debt of the federal government. So that 5 trillion naira is huge. And part of why we have it is because we didn't have a mechanism like this, to quickly resolve this thing and get this money from those who are owing the banks. So you are talking about what strengthens part of the what strengthens the credit tribunal. Okay, I think the fact that the BOFIA also provides that the president of the tribunal, enjoys immunity. So once the tribunal has given a judgment, the president has taken an action, you can't now come to sue the president of the tribunal. So it also reinforces, that tribunal. And as I said, in the capital market, we have an equivalent. We have the investment and securities tribunal. So those who say it's a duplication, we have EFCC, we have the courts. Why also have this? What about are they saying the IST in the capital market is of no relevance? Okay, so I think the tribunal is quite good. But there are concerns. The concern I've read about it, came from the National Economic Summit Group. Okay, of course the NSEG supports it, but they're only saying that the fee, okay, the case fee, if you're applying for a case, okay, the case fee of 0.5% of the claim you're making, that is quite high, that the government should look into it. That is, I think that's the angle of the NSEG. But NSEG supports the issue of having a credit tribunal. The other provision there that I also think will help reduce the issue of non-performing loans, I also mentioned it earlier, is Section 19 of BOFIA. Section 19 of BOFIA 2020 prohibits banks from granting unsecured credit. And there's also the section that talks about single obligor limit. Single obligor limit, max of 20% of shareholders' funds shareholders' funds. Shareholders' funds comprise share capital and reserves. These are what make up shareholders' funds. So 20% of shareholders' funds unimpaired by losses. Okay, you don't have to be exposed, more than that. So I think the implementation of that, because we know the issue of non-performing loans, especially when it comes to insiders, directors. Okay, banks tend to flout that. Banks tend to give them loans, in excess of what is provided. And there is also the issue of over-concentration. You see banks concentrating their credit, to a particular sector, especially high-risk sectors. Part of why we're having many banks are having problems today with the collapse in oil price is because of overexposure to the oil sector, giving loans to the oil sector. So I think generally the BOFIA 2020 will again, strengthen financial systems and stability. I also talked about the issue of the central bank being part of the banks, attending their meetings.
I would really like for you, maybe when we come back to you, because in all of this, we want to know the specific monetary provisions from BOFIA, as of course as a punishment for offenders, and there may be the regulatory powers of the NDIC and the CBN in all of this, and how of course this will now help to sanitize the industry.
Yes,
but
I will also want to touch on the some aspects of the bill that I would also want to see.
Act, you mean?
Yes, the act now that I will also, maybe in future, I will also want to see amended.
Yes.
And some of those concerns have also been expressed by the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. Okay. I want to mention, a few of them.
Okay, so when we come back to Abuja, let's bring in Professor Ango. Prof, Professor Owaleke here is always going to India, but let me also take you to China, where research has also shown that some decades ago, of course, they also experienced some of the financial recessions, but they perfected their strategy of debt recovery by making the asset management companies more efficient and proactive and proactive. We have our own asset management company here, and I want for you to tell us, is this tribunal, is it for want of words a collateral, for debt recovery? Is it efficient? Is it that all we need? My directors are telling us to go for a short break. So please keep the questions. When we come back, you'll give us your response. This is Good Morning Nigeria. Let's take a quick short break. When we come back, we'll now go over to Professor Ango.
Viruses. What are viruses? A computer virus, much like a flu virus, is designed to spread from host to host and has the ability to replicate itself. Similarly, in the same way that viruses cannot reproduce without a host cell, computer viruses cannot reproduce and spread without programming, such as a file or document. But there are ways to prevent this. Safety and prevention tips. Install antivirus or malware software from renowned computer security providers. Keep your antivirus software up to date. Run regularly scheduled scans with your antivirus software. Keep your operating system current. Don't use open Wi-Fi. Back up your files. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Communication Commission, NCC.
The counsel of our fathers.
I believe we have fought one civil war too many in this country. So those who experience it will run away from it.
Nigerian youths, let's build our nation together.
My name is Nando Jamda
Muhammad.
Stevita
Hussein Musa. Roduna Joel Finji. Said Musa John.
I'm a carpenter. I've been doing this for more than 8 years now.
And I said that plantain. Nakai Kimami Shekara Uku.
I've been selling my tomatoes for about 10 years now, and I do it for a better Nigeria.
And I do it for a better Nigeria.
And you can see how we are doing our small little work to make Nigeria great.
As you can see, I'm a technician and I'm doing it to help myself and to help my generation.
Business.
This message is from the National Orientation Agency.
Dialogue, empathy, love, and unity. These are vital components of nation building.
For all to be well, we appeal that we should refrain from volatile, provocative, inciting messages and language.
Let's build and not destroy.
Welcome back, and our focus this morning is on the Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act 2020, just assented to by Mr. President. So let's go over to Kaduna studio where Professor Yushao Ango is. Professor Ango, I asked a question. I said in China decades ago, you know, they strengthened their debt recovery strategy by, of course, making their asset management companies better position, more proactive and more efficient. We have Amcon company here, asset management company here. How can we make it more effective? Will the tribunal be sort of a buffer for it?
Absolutely. The Amcon will find the tribunal very useful. They have quite a number of cases that they will rather take, because some of the Amcon activities involve going to courts actually sometimes to recover some of these huge amounts. So they will find it very useful. But it should be noted that even Amcon itself, Amcon or Amcon related or Amcon-like kind of institutions are all over, you know, in, like you said, China, India, Malaysia, Turkey. Many countries have had similar, if you like, institutions all trying to collect the bad debts, you know, so as to make the books of the banks cleaner, you know, for more unimpaired, if you like, transactions. Now, they will find this tribunal very, very useful. But Amcon itself has a time limit, you know. I read somewhere where they said by 2023, Amcon will not be there. In the provisions of the Act, there was provision for some monies to be set aside annually, you know, as a buffer, you know, to take cognizance or care of some of these bad debts. And that will be contributed somewhat by the CBN and the other deposit-taking agencies. So I believe this, having this tribunal will help Amcon very well to recover. But I learned there is a time limit for Amcon, so that means probably we are likely going to see some other structure that will come up to replace Amcon or give it a new life, as it were. But I believe more than anybody, the Amcon will find this tribunal very useful.
Well, Professor Ango, thank you so much. Let's get down to Ayodeji Ebo in Lagos and then hear from him about, you know, the public fear or the real sector fear about why banks seem not to be heading towards their direction. Although there are interventions here and there from so many sectors into the real sector, but the BOFI Act 2020 seemed to encourage the banks to do that so that the economy can grow fast, really. Are the fears you express at the real sector, talking about the C's you mentioned, collateral, for instance, capacity and character? The capacity and character, you do have them, really. But the collateral thing seemed to be behind the fear. I mean, is that fear really founded?
Yeah, interesting. I think we should first recognize that for the banks, they are private sector led, and they also have that responsibility to protect the shareholders' fund. So while I agree that in terms of their risk level, can be improved on. But the first thing that we would need to note that some of these perceived risks are still very inherent. So when you look at the system, so you look at for the average SME that wants to even borrow funds, are they competitive? So you look at our infrastructure system, they will need to provide their power, they need to provide a lot of their resources, even the distribution of their goods will come at a higher cost. As a result of that, they are always out of work. So when you do the visibility study, you would discover that the margin that they will make would almost not be there, would be very thin, and any major shock can throw them out of balance. So for the banks, they are always very careful about that, because when you look at, we are comparing, if you are selling now that the after will be enforced from January, are these companies going to be very competitive? When you need to, by the time you had that cost of other amenities that government should provide for you or should support you with, then your products will not be very competitive, and you may not be able to recover the loans that you have collected. So for the banks, that's one side, that's one view, one side that I think we should also look at. But on the other side, we may also want to look at them. They need to begin to change focus. So when you look at what is currently happening, in the last 1 year or 2 years, interest rate on risk-free investments was as high as 18% when you look at the effective yield and you adjust for tax. No reasonable business person would want to go and lend at 30% when you can get a risk-free investment at 18%. Now, if we look at the current situation, 364-day treasury bills is as low as 0.3%. Now, for most banks, would be forced to begin to change their mindset. So you can test the waters and say you are setting a particular amount to see how you want to grow that particular sector. There's one of the banks that you can see that they focused a lot on the agri sector. They are growing big within that space. Over time, they would master that particular sector, and that would help them minimize the risk, improve on their risk framework, and that would impact as we progress into the real sector. So what my view is that most banks should carve a niche for themselves. Look at, do you want to go into the health sector? Do you want to go into the education sector, construction sector? Try and master that sector to minimize that risk. That risk would have to live with it. So the collateral that we're trying to solve, you know, there's this collateral registry that was set up, and that allowed movable assets to be registered. While I may not be able to say how effective that has been, but with also the credit tribunal, it means that cases can also be brought to a close immediately. Looking at how the structure of the banking system is now, it's also with that credit bureau system that have also been set up, you can see your credit history over time. I've personally, on my own, I've gone there to pay online and check my credit history. I was able to see all the history of some of the credit I've accessed in the past and how those payments have been made. So I think would evolve over time that banks will begin to change their focus. Now, the loan-to-deposit ratio policy of the CBN is also pushing the banks to look at lending by all means. No, the treasury bills environment is becoming a zero-yield environment, so there's no easy money on the table for the banks. Now would be the focus to shift into loans. We saw before pre-COVID, personal loans has been increasing. So they have been giving uncollateralized loans to even SMEs. You see, they profile your account based on the algorithm, and they are able to profile that account and let you know the available credits that based on the transactions on your account that you can easily access. We believe that once the coast is clearer now and there's some form of stability in the economy, we'll begin to also see that. We've seen mortgage rates have also, there are banks that have reduced that mortgage rates significantly.
All right, Ayodeji, thank you. Well, we all know that with the use of our smartphones, we can almost transact our financial businesses, from anywhere in the world or anywhere in the country, provided, as Professor Uche Waleke would say, you have the fundamental, which is, of course, connectivity. But there is also a percentage of people who are not ICT compliant and who would also require, to go to the bank, to conduct their own transactions. Now, the BOFI Act 2020 prohibits banks from opening what I would say indiscriminate opening of branches here and there, and all that, or what you would call rural banking. Professor Waleke, the banks are kicking against it.
Well, I would say banking is evolving, and unlike what we used to have, it's going beyond the issue of brick and mortar. Okay, even the banks themselves recognize that the future is in having fewer branches. Okay, and with the advent of agency banking, the central bank has been promoting agency banking. So that has, if you like, is now filling that gap. Okay, so a bank doesn't need to have branches.
Physical.
Yes,
presence.
physical presence. Structures. Okay, all over the country. Okay, what the bank requires is to, have agents, commission agents that can be in those rural areas, attending to, the people. For one, of course, it reduces cost. Part of why you find interest rates.
But the license will now specify your area of operation.
The license has always done that. The license will say if you're a national bank, for example, you
have a wide spread.
Exactly.
National spread.
Yes, if you're a regional bank, you're restricted within a particular region. The license will specify that. So what I'm saying is that going forward, okay, a bank doesn't necessarily have to have physical, because as I said, it increases even their cost of operations. And this cost of operations, they have a way of shifting them, to their customers, by way of higher lending rate, higher charges.
But this agency or agent, I don't know what you call it,
yes.
banking.
Yes.
How reliable is it? Do the people have the people developed confidence, in having a transaction with such a scheme? Yes,
it's going to. Of course, it's a gradual thing with increased awareness. I'm sure it will be the level of acceptance.
I mean, because if you come to me as an agent, yes, I'll have to verify, your identity, verify, or do other ground checks, before I.
But that's not a problem. As I said, these are licensed agents. Yes, and they will help you with your, basic banking transactions. So I was making a point, if you permit me. Yes, the point has also been made that banks are, more like private sector institutions, and just like any other, private business, the objective, banks are there to make profit. And the objective, as we say in finance, is to maximize shareholders' wealth. So they want to maximize their shareholders' wealth, okay, which is why a lot of banks will find it difficult lending to the real sector because of the high risk. Okay, banks will prefer to do business that will quickly give them money. as profit-oriented businesses. So that's why most of the time the central bank is only left with the moral suasion tool to encourage them to lend to the real sector. So the way lending to the real sector will be more effective, especially against the backdrop of infrastructure deficit. Part of why banks have difficult lending to the real sector is because if you lend to a businessman, the small business person, has challenges of infrastructure, for example, and he may not, the entrepreneur may not be able to even repay the loan. So the issue of infrastructure is there, okay, except we address this infrastructure bottlenecks. It may be difficult for banks to say they're lending to the real sector, and that is why the central bank came up with the idea of NISA. So the central bank can provide a guarantee, especially with respect to lending to the agri sector. There is NISA, to guarantee that such loans, will come back whenever they are given out. The other issue I want to point out are issues to do with the bill, which, in my view, okay, it deserves issues that deserve a second look. One of them is Section 3, subsection 3 of the Bofia bill, okay, that says the central bank governor, has a right to refuse granting a license, a banking license, without giving any reason. Okay, so that to me should be looked into. Section 3, subsection 3 of the Bofia bill.
And there's a concern there.
Yes, the concern. When you refuse a license.
I thought the new act says the CBN should provide explanation for either refusing or accepting.
Oh, okay, the one I saw.
Okay.
The one I saw, Section 3.3 is saying, no. So if it has been taken care of, that.
Yes. I thought in the research it says the CBN, has to give a reason, for either accepting or rejecting a application for a license.
That makes a lot of sense. And there is also the issue of jurisdiction. Some sections too that define the business of banking. Okay, that definition is quite is so generic, such that it even encroaches. It tends to encroach into things that are ordinarily regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. So there are certain aspects of the Act that appear to be in conflict with CAMA and the Investment and Securities Act of 2007. Okay, that of CAMA, for example, I think one of the sections there, talks about mergers and reconstructions. Okay, banks, mergers and reconstructions. That if a bank wants to undertake a reconstruction, or two banks want to merge, that the banks themselves can initiate the meeting and take the decisions. Whereas CAMA says it has to be a court-ordered process. So the Federal High Court, usually supervises, that kind of thing, in order to protect the shareholders. So that should be looked into.
Prof, we have a lot of tweets here, and there are questions that have been asked by the viewers. So I think we'll just take some of them. And gentlemen, I'll advise you just, if you have your pens, there are a number of questions that have come in. Let me take this one. Dele Jack Solomon says, the Bofia Act 2020 will strengthen the regulatory and supervisory framework for the financial industry, indeed, and provide additional tools for managing failing institutions and systemic distress to preserve financial stability, among others. He said effective engagement of stakeholders is needed.
Low Alpha says whatever is the Act all about, it should address the merit of deductions from commercial banks at will, that is, and also aim at repositioning them for efficient service delivery.
So the first question will be commercial deductions from commercial banks. Does the Bofia Act 2020 address such? So Mutana Farouk, financial institutions in Nigeria need to be strengthened in terms of financial and other dealings that have direct bearing on financing micro, small, and medium enterprises, that is MSMEs, at a single-digit rate interest. This can help to boost the Nigerian economy internally.
We've been talking about that, the real sector here now. And Suleiman Babagana says it will bring sanity to the sector, and that's the Bofia Act, and then attract foreign direct investment, thereby boosting the economy of the country.
Okay, Nandop Wiyep says, I think there's a lot the CBN needs to look into, like cutting on certain bank charges and ensuring a friendlier customer service, which should keep us smiling to the bank. If you keep pinching my savings, how much will be left for me? We deserve to breathe a sigh of relief.
Yeah, you do, really, for sure. Chris Simon here is, praising PNB. He's saying PNB has done a good work by assenting to Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act, or a bill, 2020, that's making it an act. The bill, the act will stabilize banking operations and prevent reckless driving, rather recklessness, reckless giving of loans, that is, to customers.
Okay, Gbadamosi Haruna Damu, appreciating the bill, says what matters most is the execution of the laws, as the banking system is more or less like a public enterprise.
Jibril Salih Sunaina says banks truly need to be recovered, and then loans have to be given from debtors. And of course, as it's among reasons making some banks refusing to borrow to adequate number of people, or even leading them to near collapse. People will no longer be rich with loans for free, and thanks to PNB for assenting to the bill.
All right, Usman Banukanto's concern is rampant cases of stealing by bank staff from customers' account, which he wants to be brought to an end, and also, of course, to for job security for workers, and to make the sector more vibrant and legitimate, he says.
Mike Yako here says, we have witnessed bank failures in Nigeria, with depositors losing their investments. The causes of the failures are not far-fetched. Inside abuses and reckless loans without due process, and directors of those banks went scot-free. Bank is fulcrum of development of any nation. The recently signed bill on bank is a welcome development, as it will bring stability in the banking system and then restore more confidence in the system. And this will lead to massive development, and investors will flood.
Okay, Danladi Ndayebo says the Credit Tribunal to improve loan recovery is perhaps the single most important merit of the Buffy Act 2020. He says this will support economic recovery and promote sustainable growth.
Titus Mondaynak says loan portfolios aren't clearly spelt, and then individuals are trapped by, petrified into accepting abnormalities. Now, the banks become a fraud when they see you with a clean financial health bill and try to co-opt you into indebtedness by sending you tempted messages to fall into their traps.
And Uchenna Emmanuel says his concern says, my question is, why would deposit and microfinance banks lend MSMEs or SMEs rate at 29% cumulatively?
Finally, Eureka Donatus Letam says both year 2020 is a welcome development, and then mostly in the area of credit tribunal, because the judicial bottleneck experienced in the recovery of non-performing facilities will be reduced greatly. And these are the tweets we have. Let's finally look at one or two aspects on this discussion before we round up. I'd rather go over to Professor Ango and then say, when we look at the Central Bank of Nigeria, which is expected to hold structured engagements really with stakeholders across various sectors of the economy, that is on critical aspects of Buffy Act in the coming months. What and what does this structured engagement entail in this act?
I believe what they want to do is to reach out to interested parties and probably come up with common understanding of the way forward. Now, what the central bank has done in the last few years, in my opinion, generally in response to our economic realities, is that it's actually helping a lot, because they are coming up with a lot of initiatives which are very positive, which will work in the interest of the economy. Now, having said this, I want to comment on even the future of, especially the question you put to Prop, pertaining to the realities on ground when we are looking at the future of banking, especially this issue of automation and things like that. Now, the reality is that the future looks like there will be amalgamation of many functions. What is today traditionally banking function is being performed by many and will be performed by many other institutions. So there is those agencies, or at least in terms of agency banking we're looking at, banking itself will look different most probably in the next few years. And central bank obviously and the government is responding to these things. Right now we have banking as we know it. What we are going to see probably in the next 10 years will be different completely. And we have to actually structure and put, condition ourselves properly to key in to what the future looks like. Nobody will have expected, for example, the quantum of e-transactions that are taking place now, to the extent that even during lockdown, the banking sector, the financial sector generally, had a growth, in their contribution to GDP, unlike other sectors. Even though banks were closed, the financial sector did very well. Why? Because there are openings, there are ways of doing transactions outside of hard and mortar that we know. So the future is even going to be even much more. The future of money itself is going to be something else. So we have to sit and get ready, and we have to plan to ensure we key into it. That is my take. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Professor Yusha Ango. Quickly, Professor Uche-Walike, the last, just in 60 seconds. There are monetary provisions, for, anyone who, gets punished, gets for infractions committed. Considering the powers that these EDs and CEOs wield in the banking industry, isn't this between 20 to 50 million penalty a giveaway?
I think it has been increased now in the BOFIA. But let me touch on something quickly. This structured engagement that he mentioned, part of that will be the contentious provision, Section 12, subsection 6, that talks about restorative action. If a bank license is revoked, for example, that the central bank, that the best the person can get, will be just monetary compensation. So I support that. It is for the central bank to ensure that the public or stakeholders, understand why that has to be so. But on the issue of penalties, yes. I think the penalties are stiffer now, than they used to be.
Okay, many thanks, Professor Uche-Walike. Professor Uche-Walike is President, Capital Market Academics of Nigeria. We thank you so much for being part of this program this morning.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. So we extend our gratitude to Ayodeji Ebo, the senior economist and head research and strategy, Greenwich Merchant Bank. It's our pleasure being with us this morning. For having me. You've been a very nice contributor, and of course, Professor Ango is a professor of finance and entrepreneurship, Kaduna State University. We thank you so much for being part of this package this morning.
Thank you very much.
Just to add the use of that, Professor Uche-Walike is also Chairman, Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria, Abuja branch. So, gentlemen, we appreciate all of you, and also say a lot. Thank you to all of you for your tweets. And that's it for us on Good Morning Nigeria this Wednesday. We'll appreciate you. Join us again, same time tomorrow, same station. I am Claire Adelabu Abdulrazak. Bye-bye.
I'm Yusuf Nadabu Suman. Stay safe. Bye-bye.